Hello, my name is Randika, and you've joined Jerome and I to talk about a certain aspect of Sri Lankan wildlife that we don't often hear about on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, and I think it's also part of wildlife as well as tourism. What we are here to talk about today is the very serious issue of crocodiles and crocodile safety in Sri Lanka.
Today, do you want to talk a little bit about the types of crocodiles that we have on the island?
So we've got two types of crocodiles in Sri Lanka, the saltwater crocodile and the mugger crocodile. The saltwater crocodile is a fascinating animal and also found here in Australia. They are the largest living reptiles in the world, and they can grow in excess of 20 feet and can weigh over a ton. They're really, really spectacular animals, but they're also animals that actively hunt and kill people. The mugger crocodile is slightly smaller, but also found in Sri Lanka, and they do also kill and harm a lot of people in Sri Lanka.
You know, one thing I realized was on one of my trips to Sri Lanka, I took a bus or something that went through Nilwala. So there was like it said, "Welcome to Nilwala," and then it had the statue or picture of a crocodile, and I was like, "Oh, that's actually very interesting." Then later on, I read a little bit about it, and then I was almost shocked to find out that there were so many crocodiles in the Nilwala River.
Yes, and this is an interesting point because it's not just the Nilwala River. Saltwater crocodiles and mugger crocodiles are found all over Sri Lanka, but particularly saltwater crocodiles, they're found all throughout the island. A saltwater crocodile can tolerate saline water as well as fresh water. And so they travel throughout the extensive networks of canals and wetlands in Sri Lanka. Now, let's not forget that Colombo is also a wetland. It's a wetland town, and it's actually been listed on the world list of wetland cities. What that means is that there are saltwater crocodiles all around Colombo. And if you don't believe me, go into YouTube and type in Crocodile Colombo, and you will be shocked at the number of crocodile videos you will find of crocodiles in Colombo, on the Gulf face and in its surrounding areas.
There are some fascinating images as well about the size of these crocodiles, like that they capture sometimes to relocate or whatnot. In Sri Lanka, growing up, I didn't really think that we had, such huge crocodiles in Sri Lanka.
It's very true, and very few Sri Lankans are aware that these crocodiles exist to begin with, and secondly, how to be croc safe as well. Now, that term croc safe is a term that we use here in Australia because Australia has lots and lots of crocodiles as well, especially along its northern coast and in northeast Queensland. But we have a concept here called being croc safe, which refers to the behaviors that allow us to occupy the same space as crocodiles while being safe. Now, Sri Lanka has no equivalent.
That is true, because one thing that even Tourism Australia in those areas focuses on is giving tourists the information for to be, like you said, croc safe. Like, we have lots of boards where, where people are made aware, don't do this and this in this area, don't go into the waters, because the area has lots of crocodiles.
There are these famous signs all over northern Australia which say, do not enter the water here, a large saltwater crocodile occupies this place. There are even minimum restrictions in terms of how far away from the water's edge you can camp. There are lots of different strategies that children are taught from a very young age in places where crocodiles live in Australia, so that most adults and children and even tourists have an idea of how to stay safe in crocodile country. We call it crocodile country out here in Australia. But the result of all of this croc safe training from a young age is that most children, adults, and even tourists who visit crocodile country or places where there are crocodiles have an instinctive awareness of how to stay safe when traveling through those areas.
That is true, because that reminds me of an interesting statistic where, because it was reported that in Australia the crocodile attacks are like an average of 2 per year.
Yes.
Or something like that. So that could definitely be because of all the awareness trainings and all the marketing, all the awareness training that Australia puts into it.
Australia has on average about 1 to 2 deaths a year from crocodiles. Now, that might seem like a lot until you realize that there are thousands of crocodiles living in the north and in close proximity to people in Australia. By comparison, Sri Lanka shockingly has a much higher level of crocodile-human conflict. So I believe, Randika, you've got some statistics that illustrate just how many times people are fatally attacked by crocodiles.
That's true. So I recently read a research article which discussed the number of fatalities over a 5-year period in Sri Lanka. So the numbers were 27 fatal attacks, so attacks that led to deaths, was 27 for saltwater crocodiles and 49 for mugger crocodiles. That's a huge number, although that's for over a 5-year period. When you take an average across those 5 years per year, it's a huge number for a small country like Sri Lanka.
To put it into perspective, over that same 5-year period, Australia would have had an average of about 6 deaths or so. And in terms of attacks, this is quite shocking. There were over 150 reported attacks in Sri Lanka over that same 5-year period. That is a huge amount of attacks, because Australia and Sri Lanka have a roughly similar population. And Australia has a much higher number of crocodiles. And for there to have been 150 attacks, there has to be something seriously wrong in the way Sri Lankans are interacting with crocodiles.
I think the article I read talked about how there is a lot of awareness amongst these communities where the attacks took place about the presence of the crocodiles. But in terms of their decision to engage, or in terms of their decision to be in the areas and put themselves at risk of these crocodile attacks, were also taking place because these sources of bodies of water were sources of for bathing and for cleaning, and that were their only source of water for those areas. So those sorts of things create an environment where attacks such as these take place.
And it's also important to remember that another thing we have realized while doing research for this video was that a lot of Sri Lankan people who live around crocodiles don't dispose of their waste very carefully, which often brings them into closer contact with crocodiles. For example, here in Australia, it is well known that you don't fish or clean your fish near the water's edge. It's known that you don't dispose of meat and edible substances in areas where crocodiles live, because that would attract crocodiles towards people. Now, I've watched a few news reports in Sri Lanka where people would quite openly dispose of their trash, meat, scraps, food scraps, right into the river, and watch crocodiles feasting on that refuse in close proximity to people. What that does is it brings these gigantic crocodiles very close to people as they associate people with food.
What that does is that it creates an environment where the crocodile sort of associates with having sufficient amounts of food and stuff. So if you were a butcher dumping your waste into a certain river, area of a river every day or whatnot, then crocodiles would become aware of that and they would be in that area. And if by chance a human goes into that environment, then that is like prime environment for a crocodile attack to take place.
Another thing that we've learned is that Sri Lankans have very poor awareness of how crocodiles behave. I've heard myths like the fact that a crocodile will only approach you very slowly on the surface of the water, as though you have plenty of time to react. I've also heard things like crocodiles can be warded off by prayers or certain sayings, and even the belief that crocodiles aren't harmful unless you go up to them. Now, these are really dangerous beliefs because crocodiles do actively hunt people, and like any active hunting animal, will figure out ways of sneaking up on people and capturing and killing and eating them. These beliefs, I think, are also quite problematic because here in Australia, we're always trained to be aware that if you're in crocodile country, you must be aware that the local crocodiles know where you are, and to assume that the crocodiles will attack you and to behave in accordance with that. That keeps a lot of people very safe in crocodile country.
It's true. We should be aware that crocodiles have a high sense of awareness, more so than we would at a water's edge. They would know when there's someone there.
One of the statistics that illustrates this point is in the very same study Randika talked about. 94% of people who'd been attacked by crocodiles said that they were aware of the crocodile's presence, but chose to disregard it for various reasons. Now, that is a ridiculously high number of people who knowingly go into dangerous places.
That is true. I think the reason for that, as we discussed earlier, is also because sometimes people don't have other options in terms of access to water sources, right? And this is also an area which, this creates a good segue into the next area. Like, there's a lot of research that's being done in Sri Lanka as well, right? To raise awareness and also to create areas within water's edge that would protect people.
Yes.
Especially by Anselm de Silva.
Yes, so there's a very famous crocodile researcher called Anselm de Silva, who is a herpetologist. A herpetologist is somebody who studies reptiles, who has contributed a huge amount to understanding crocodile safety in Sri Lanka. We have a system in Sri Lanka called Kimbul Kotua, which is a man-made barrier between the riverbank and the access points to the river, which allows people to bathe and clean in safety from crocodiles. And I think Anselm de Silva was involved in designing that.
That is true, because what that allows is for people, especially in areas where they can't access other sources of water, it gives them some sort of an area where they can now go and, bathe, clean their dishes, clothes, everything, without having that fear of crocodiles taking them.
And also, Randika, can I ask you, like, growing up, what did you learn about crocodiles? Or what have people around you said to you about crocodiles? Because growing up in Sri Lanka, I don't remember people telling me much about crocodiles or about crocodile safety.
No, I don't think I have heard anything about crocodiles either. That's why I was like shocked that Nilwala had a crocodile as its essentially mascot. Yeah, so I was shocked that was the case. So that was the beginning of my journey to understanding how crocodiles sort of affect the lives of people in Sri Lanka, and also of the presence of mugger and saltwater crocodiles in Sri Lanka as well.
It's also important to remember that ignorance serves as no barrier towards being safe from a crocodile. And the reason we made this video is partially for Sri Lankans, but also for tourists. Sri Lanka has an extremely open culture when it comes to bathing in rivers, surfing, playing in the waves. We're an island country, and as island people, we like spending time in and around the ocean and rivers. And some of my fondest memories have been play at a riverbank somewhere, or chuck rocks into the river and to bathe in the river. Within the context of what we've talked about today, those were very dangerous things we were doing. The reason we're making this video partly is for any tourists who think of going to Sri Lanka to be extremely aware of crocodiles. Unlike in Australia and other places, there will be no signs indicating that crocodiles live in a particular area. Every time you enter any water in Sri Lanka, you are at risk of being attacked by a crocodile.
I think as anyone who is entering any sources of water in Sri Lanka, it would be truly wise to exercise a high degree of caution when you're in those areas, because you never know, which areas would have crocodiles and which areas not. So it's always good to be a little bit aware of your surroundings.
Yes. Some quick tips with crocodile safety that we've learned is never splash around near the edge of the water if you think there are crocodiles around you, because crocodiles can detect the splashing in the water. Don't swim in places where you may suspect there are crocodiles. Do not dispose of your waste anywhere near areas there are crocodiles. And do not swim at dawn and dusk, because these are the times when crocodile attacks peak. I think according to that study, crocodile attacks peaked between 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. and 5 and 7 p.m. in Sri Lanka.
So yeah, next time you're in Sri Lanka, just be aware of what we've talked about today, and also keep an eye out for some of these crocodiles that you might see as you're walking around Colombo in the little waterways there.
Yes, Colombo is a wetland, and Colombo is also connected by lots of canals, and those canals are often occupied by crocodiles. Historically, there are stories of crocodiles living in and around Beira Lake and in the surrounding areas as well. And the reason this is important is because in Sri Lanka, your safety is essentially within your hands when it comes to crocodiles. So if you're ever unsure, make sure you ask your tour guide, ask the local people before you step into any bodies of water in Sri Lanka, because like I've said, the crocodiles in Sri Lanka are distributed all throughout the island and in no particular location. So be safe, enjoy Sri Lanka's rivers and ocean responsibly.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful country. So as a local or as a tourist, just be careful when you're around waters. And
if you like this video and you enjoy videos about Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan history, multiculturalism, and also issues about Sri Lanka, feel free to like this video, and please subscribe to our channel. That makes a big difference. And follow us on Facebook as well. Thank you for watching.